One of our last days in Farmers. We have just received a report that a Russian armoured column has broken through in the direction of the Matra Mountains and reached the outskirts of Gyeongis. Our units, who have been outflanked, are anxious to recover the situation and close the gap. The weather has deteriorated and is becoming an additional test for us because the whole terrain is heavily hilly and the cloud cover lies very low. We leave Budapest to the right and soon see the Matra Mountains ahead and the Gyeongis even further ahead. To the south, fires are burning. Obviously something is going on there. I can see tanks coming down the road, and clearly not German tanks. As I turn in their direction to get a general idea of the enemy forces, I am met by heavy anti-aircraft fire. We are circling at low altitude over the head of the tank column. To ahead of the T-34s and ISS hums a new type of tank that I have never seen before, but it is not an American machine either. I destroy this tank first and then switch to the others. Soon 5 tanks are on fire, but I'm out of ammunition. The anti-tank link did a good job, and for Ivan the day started badly. We regroup and move home. On the way we are intercepted by late-appearing Soviet Yak-9 fighters, but they do us no harm. We are already behind our positions, and it is only 10 minutes of flying time to the base when it suddenly occurs to me what words will I use to describe the first tank hit in my report. Will I get a clear enough picture from which I can identify the type of this tank? It is very important that our general staff knows what types of tanks appear on certain parts of the front. Such information indicates what new weapons began to be produced or came from other countries. I must know what model this tank was, so I order the commander of the 3rd Squadron to lead the planes home, and I turn round and fly back. I turn down the throttle a little, and at a height of 3 to 4 meters fly around several times the mysterious steel monster, examining it from the closest distance. To the side of it stands an IS, which, in all probability, came up from somewhere in the tail of the column to find out what's going on. The strange tank is still on fire. As I fly round it one last time, I see several Ivans climbing up the turret of the IS to the 13mm anti-aircraft machine gun mounted there. As if on cue they raise their heads, I see smoke coming out of the muzzle of their machine gun and realize that they have opened fire on me. I am at a distance of 50, at most 60 meters from them. It is difficult for them to hit me because the circles I describe have too small a radius. Unless they are experienced shooters who have been specially trained to shoot at such targets. I am still reasoning along these lines when 2 hits fall on my aircraft and I feel a searing pain in my left thigh. I struggle to overcome the darkness in front of my eyes and make sure that warm blood is trickling down my leg. I mentioned the injury to Gadaman, but he can't do anything because he can't reach me. We don't have any bandages. The area we're flying over seems sparsely populated and not particularly suitable for landing. If we land here, it will take God knows how long to get medical attention, and I'll bleed to death. So I must try to reach Budapest, which is a 25-minute flight from us. I feel like I'm rapidly losing my strength. The blood is still pouring out. I have a strange feeling. A kind of trance. But I keep flying and I can still control my feelings. I ask Gadaman, "Do you think I could suddenly lose consciousness? Or will I weaken gradually?" "You'll never make it to Budapest. In all probability. But you won't suddenly lose consciousness." He says the last words in addition, in a cursive voice, probably to avoid upsetting me. Then I'll fly onwards. And try my luck. Maximum throttle. Minutes of anxious tension. I will not give up. I won't. Here comes the airfield with the fighters, Budapest. Release the flaps. Throttle down. I'm landing. That's it. I'm going to the operating table in a private hospital. The nurses are crowded around me, looking at me with curiosity. Behind the surgeon, Professor Fick, stands Gaderman, shaking his head. He tells me later that when I was under anesthesia, I said a few things that in all probability failed to delight the nurses. What can be done in such a situation? Professor Fick explains that I was hit by 2 bullets from a 13mm machine gun, one, which he has already extracted, entered at an angle into my thigh and the other went through and through. He tells me that I have lost a lot of blood, and as soon as he puts a plaster cast on me, I will be sent to a sanatorium on Lake Balaton, so that I can recover faster and let my wounds heal in peace and quiet. Meanwhile, Fridolin has arrived and scolds me for getting into all this because of my curiosity, but although he doesn't tell me directly, he is glad that nothing worse has happened. He reports that we are to relocate to the Stolwesenberg area and that we will be standing by at Borgående. They secure my stretcher in a sanitary storch and take me to heavies on Lake Balaton, where I am to be treated at Dr. Peter's sanatorium. I have already asked Professor Fick how long my recovery will take, and when I will be able to walk at least, let alone fly. He gives an evasive answer, presumably because Gaderman has already told him about my impatient nature. I insist that Dr. Peter remove my bandages immediately and tell me how long he expects me to stay here. He at first refuses to remove the bandages, but then after much argument he examines the wound and says, "If there are no complications, you can stay here for 6 weeks." Up until this point I hadn't been particularly concerned about the wound, but now I feel like I'm losing everything again, doomed to inaction at a time when every man is needed. I'm furious. This is the situation: my leg is in a cast and I can hardly move around. But of one thing I am firmly convinced: it won't last long. No matter how beneficial the medical care and rest will be to me, I won't be able to rest truly until I get back to the regiment and start flying with it. Fridolin comes down from Borgående every day and visits me with a briefcase full of papers to sign. He keeps me in touch with the regiment's martial affairs, all its anxieties and needs. Between Farmers and our present aerodrome, the regiment has been temporarily stationed, only for a few days, at the aerodrome at Vesek, a suburb of Budapest. It is bad November weather, and despite the critical situation, we make only a few combat sorties. On the 8th day, he visits me again and brings me the news that the Soviets are attacking Budapest with large forces and have already captured a bridgehead on this side of the Danube. Worse still, their new offensive from the south towards Balaton threatens to drive a wedge between our positions. He's not at all surprised when I tell him that I've had enough of lying in bed and am going to get up and return to the regiment with him. But he doesn't finish that sentence. He knows of my stubbornness. Nurse hears Fridolin packing my things and can't believe her eyes when she peeks through the door to see what's going on. When Dr. Peter, who has been warned by her, appears, he catches me already ready to leave. I know full well that he can't take responsibility, and I don't ask him for anything. He shakes his head, watching us leave. An hour later, a car takes us to the station. We stand in the village for the time the regiment is stationed at Farmos. The people are very friendly towards us, which is to be expected. They hope that we can stop the Russians and liberate the already occupied part of their country. My orderly Dahlman has already prepared for my arrival and heated a room in a small cottage, no doubt believing it will be needed as a hospital ward. A few days pass and the weather improves. I have been flying since day 1, having reinforced the leg in the cast with extra straps. Moving around is difficult, but somehow manages. In mid-December, due to heavy rain and wet snow, our flying field becomes more and more like a swamp, and we return to War Pelota. This airfield is situated on dry high ground and we can take off at any time. My third squadron has finally been re-equipped with Focke-Wulf 190 fighters and, bearing in mind the current situation, I would not like to give them any special time for retraining. So 1 or 2 pilots are attached to the regimental headquarters in turn, and between combat sorties I introduce them to the new type of aircraft and teach them how to handle it. Each of them makes a few circles, the number of which depends on his flying skill, and then I take them with me as wingmen on combat sorties. After 15 or 20 sorties, their familiarization with the new aircraft is considered complete, and it is the turn of the other crews. As a result, the third squadron is capable of flying combat sorties without interruption. During their first combat sorties, the crews have to learn the hardest lessons, because the anti-aircraft defenses are strong everywhere, and besides, they are still a bit afraid to fly the new type of aircraft, especially because they do not have a gunner to back them up against enemy attacks from behind. During his first combat sortie, Lieutenant Stahler's FV-190 takes a hit in the engine and goes down immediately. He manages to make an emergency landing behind our trenches. That day everything goes wrong. Only I am about to take off with Lieutenant M, who is also undergoing training on a new machine, when a large group of IL-2s, together with a fighter escort, fly past the airfield at an altitude of 600 meters. It is a cold December day and it takes me some time to warm up the engine so that it runs normally, but in the meantime the Ivans of course disappear over the horizon. It then comes to my attention that during some really cold days, the mechanics have used a warming device that allows us to take off immediately without first warming up the engines. This device depends on specially prepared fuel to work. I make a sign to M to refuel immediately and take off after me. The bomb load for the planned departure is still under the belly of our aeroplanes. I do not want to remove the bombs as we have yet to complete our mission. Perhaps even with this cargo we can still catch up with the Ilov formation. M pilots a slow plane and lags behind. I am gradually approaching the Iron Gustavs, who cross the front line when I am still a few hundred meters away from them. But I am stubborn and I intend to attack them, even if alone. With my FV-190, I am not afraid of the Russian pilots in their La-5s and Yak-9s. Suddenly there is a rumble in the engine. Oil is gushing out of it, so that I can't see anything anymore. The oil has splashed all the cockpit windows and they are losing transparency. At first I think that the engine has been hit by an anti-aircraft shell or a burst from a Russian fighter. But then I realize that the engine piston has jammed. The engine pulls badly and makes a terrible rumbling noise. It could stop at any moment. In the second instant, I instinctively lower the nose down and head towards our positions. I should be right above them now. It is impossible to eject with a parachute, if I don't even consider the low altitude, because my leg is in a tire. The plane won't be able to go higher even a meter. I drop the lantern to be able to look round and back. I am flying at a height of 50 meters. The terrain below is unsuitable for a forced landing. Besides, I am concerned to get as close to the airfield as possible, and after landing, without wasting time, to return to my unit. A church steeple is passing me very close. It is good that it was not exactly in my way. Straight ahead I see a road embankment crossing my course at an angle. At any second I can expect the engine to stop. I can only hope that the aircraft will pass over the embankment. I pull the handle towards me and wait. Will the car make it over that embankment or not? It did. I'm touching the ground. With a crunch and scrape, the aircraft skids on the frozen ground, parallel to the wide ditch, and stops. It's my leg that worries me most, but it seems to be all right. I look round the quiet, peaceful winter landscape, only the distant booming of guns reminding me that there is still a war going on, even though Christmas is on the doorstep. I unbuckle my harness, cast a glance at the smoking engine and sit down on the fuselage. A car with 2 soldiers is coming down the road. They look at me carefully first, wanting to make sure I'm not Russian, since those are more likely to fall behind our front line than we are behind theirs. The soldiers throw the boards over the ditch and carry me to the car. An hour later I am back at the aerodrome and preparing for another sortie. We are quartered in barracks a few kilometers from the airfield, in the suburb of Warpolota. The next day, between sorties, as I lie in bed to get some rest, I hear the roar of aircraft engines. They are not German planes. Looking out the open window, I notice a formation of Russian Boston bombers flying at an altitude of 400 meters. They are coming straight at us. The bombs began to fall with a screech. I instantly find myself on the floor. Even with a healthy leg, I could not move faster. A heavy bomb explodes 15 meters in front of the window and blows my BMW to pieces. Dahlman, who at that moment comes through the door to warn me of the raid, finds the window frame around his neck. He succumbs to shock, but is uninjured. At present, thanks to our air support, there is a lull in the Balaton area, but eastwards the Soviets have bypassed Budapest and reached the Gran River north of the Danube. South of Budapest they tear from their bridgehead and, cooperating with units moving from south to northwest, go on the offensive. They are advancing along the eastern slopes of the Vizsla Mountains, north of Stolvesenberg, and Budapest is thus surrounded. We are making combat sorties in that area and further east. We are trying to hit their communications deep behind the lines in the Hadwan area where Soviet goods trains run. During these rapidly unfolding events, we become experts at everything. We play the role of dive bombers, attack planes, fighters, and reconnaissance planes. The battle to lift the siege of Budapest is in full swing. We are standing at Kemend in the Papa area. We flight personnel have just arrived from the airfield at Varpolota, and before we start to get settled, Fridolin pops his head up and asks, "Did you guys know that Christmas is only 2 days away?" He's right. It is, according to the calendar. Take off combat sortie landing, take off combat sortie landing. We live in this rhythm, day after day for years. Everything else has been swallowed up by this rhythm: cold and heat, winter and summer, weekdays and weekends. Our lives have become a few ideas and phrases that fill our brains and never leave us, especially now that war has become a struggle for survival. One day follows another. Today is the same as yesterday. Take off, where to, against whom, encounter with escort, anti-aircraft fire. These words and thoughts overwhelm both the youngest pilot and the regimental commander. How long will this go on? Will it last forever? So, the day after tomorrow, Christmas, Fridolin, together with the staff officer, goes to the group headquarters to pick up our Christmas mail. Meanwhile, congratulations to the Immelmann travelling circus come in from almost every army unit. We return from our last sortie on the very eve of Christmas Eve at 5 in the evening. Our place is decorated for Christmas, looking cheerful and festive, almost like home. Since we don't have a large room, each squadron celebrates in the largest room of their headquarters. I go round one by one. Each unit celebrates Christmas in a special way that reflects the taste of its commander. There's cheer everywhere. I spend most of Christmas with the officers of the regimental headquarters. Our room is decorated with branches of mistletoe and holly, candles burning everywhere. The 2 large fir trees and the table in front of them, laden with presents, remind us of our childhood. My soldiers' eyes reflect vivid nostalgic dreams. Their thoughts are with their wives and children at home, with their parents and families, in the past and the future. It is only our subconscious mind that we see the German military flag among the greenery. It brings us back to reality. We are celebrating Christmas at the front. We sing Silent Night, Holy Night, and other German songs. The husky soldiers' voices weave into a soft consonance. Then a great miracle takes place in our hearts. Thoughts of bombs and targets, shells and anti-aircraft guns are softened by a supernatural sense of peace, a serene and soothing peace. And we think again of sublime and beautiful things with the same simplicity as nuts, punch and candy. The last echo of favorite German songs falls silent. I say a few words about our German Christmas. I want my men to see me today, among other things, as their comrade, not their commander. We sit together happily for 1 or 2 hours, then the Christmas evening is over. St. Peter's favours on the first day of the holidays. There is a thick fog. From telephone conversations during Christmas, I know that Ivan is attacking and we are urgently needed, but we can't fly. The next morning I play a short hockey match with my men. That means me with my fur boots on, standing in the goal, because 5 weeks after my injury I can only waddle. I can't skate yet. In the afternoon our hosts, with whom we are quartered, invite me and a few other officers to go hunting. I know very little about regular or garden hunting on the ground. We have many riflemen in our troop, but only a few corrals. The hares seem to know that fate is on their side this time, and once in the cauldron, do not hesitate to leap lightning fast through the wide gaps between us. Walking through the deep snow is not at all conducive to my quick recovery. My driver, Corporal Bomi, is standing at the side. Suddenly I see some magnificent specimen leave cover and rush towards us. I turn round like a born hunter, close my left eye and bang. I pull the trigger. Someone's body falls, but not a hare's, but Bomi's, whom I gripped, like all newcomers, by hunting enthusiasm, did not notice at all. Apparently he still doubts my intentions, for he looks at me, lying down in the snow, and says reproachfully, "Well, Herr Oberst, he noticed in time that I was aiming and threw himself to the ground just before the shot was fired." The shot missed him, but the hare was unharmed. I'm even more frightened than both of my intended victims. Now that could have been a real Christmas surprise, yet another confirmation of the favourite saying of all dive pilots, nothing works itself out unless you practice. The next morning the weather is setting up nicely. Ivan is already on his feet. He makes a raid on our aerodrome. Once again their bombing is deplorably bad. It's just a disgrace. Their low-altitude attacks go over 400 meters. We take little or no damage. For the whole of the second day after Christmas we are flying combat sorties to help the ground forces to the northeast, on the River Gran, and all the rest of the Budapest front. Our peaceful Christmas mood has been dispelled. We are once again surrounded by ruthless warfare. The quiet, joyous peace of Christmas evening has receded into the purgatory of yesterday. Furious battles rage in the air and on the ground. On our side, fresh reinforcements have been brought into the fight. These are my old acquaintances, friends from the Eastern Front, tankers, who, like us, are playing the role of the High Command's fire brigade. Our common task is to help those units that are encircled in Budapest to get through, to open a corridor for them to withdraw and join the rest of the forces. Together we can pull these chestnuts out of the fire, year after year, day after day. I have fought in all sectors of the Eastern Front. I believe I have gained considerable knowledge of military tactics. Experience teaches that only practice leads to perfection. Practical knowledge is the only criterion of what is possible and impossible, good or bad. Flying sorties every day, we must know carefully every ditch, every fold of ground below, because we are constantly flying at low altitude. confusion reigns on the ground. Some of our armoured units are broken up, and the panzer grenadiers are thrown into battle like ordinary infantrymen. The tanks, who have always worked together with them in the same team, feel insecure. The infantry assigned to them have no practical experience of fighting together, and this may end in dangerous surprises. I cannot understand how such an order could have been given. Moreover, it is difficult to imagine a worse choice than the sector chosen for this offensive, which is full of swamps and other obstacles, when there are so many more favourable alternatives. The infantry, on the other hand, must advance over flat, open terrain which is ideal for tanks but has too little cover. The enemy takes full advantage, and so our infantry confronts the Soviet steel monsters, left without tank support. Why these wasted losses? The perpetrators must be brought to justice. Who gave these orders? We sit together in the evening and ponder these questions. On the 30th of December, I receive a radiogram that I must come to Berlin immediately and report to the Reichsmarschall. I am boiling with anger, because it seems to me that my presence is indispensable during these difficult operations. I leave for Berlin the same day, follow through Vienna, and am determined to return to my comrades in 2 or 3 days. Orders are orders. The only luggage I take with me is a large dispatch bag with a change of linen and toiletries. In view of the gravity of the situation, I reject the possibility of staying in Berlin for long. On the way, I have the uneasy feeling that I am being summoned for some unpleasant reason. When I was last wounded, in November, I received an order forbidding me to fly, in spite of which I resumed flying as soon as I left the hospital. Up to the present day, no one has brought it up, and I have gradually begun to interpret this silence as acquiescence. But now, as I suppose, the matter has come up again, and I am being called on the carpet. I fly to Berlin with great reluctance, knowing that I will never obey this order. I cannot simply gaze merrily around, advise or give orders at a time when my country is in danger, especially when my vast experience gives me an advantage over those who have not received sufficient training. Success is the fruit of experience, and is commensurate with it. Although I have been wounded 5 times, several of them seriously, I have been fortunate in that I have always recovered quickly and have been able to pilot aircraft again and again, day after day, year after year, all along the Eastern Front, from the White Sea to Moscow, from Astrakhan to the Caucasus. I know the Russian front inside and out. Therefore, I feel an incessant duty to keep flying and fighting until the guns are silenced and the freedom of our country is secured. I can do this because I am physically healthy and trained by sports, my good form being one of the most valuable sources of my strength. After a short stop at friends in Vienna, I land in Berlin and immediately report by telephone to Karin Hall. I would prefer to go there immediately so that I can fly back without wasting time. To my embarrassment, I am ordered to stay at Fürstenhof and apply to the Luftwaffe Ministry for a pass for the Reichsmarschall's special train, which is travelling west. My journey will be longer than I expected. My summons seems to have nothing to do with imposing a punishment. The next evening we head west from Grunwald Station. This means that I will meet the new year on this train. I strive not to think of my unit. As soon as I start thinking about them, everything goes black in front of my eyes. What will 1945 bring us? We arrive in the Frankfurt area early on the morning of 1st January. I hear the roar of planes and peer into the grey pre-dawn haze. An armada of fighter planes flying at low altitude passes close to the carriage. My first thought is, the Americans, it's been forever since I've seen so many of our planes in the sky at the same time. But it's just unbelievable they all have German swastikas on them, and they are single fighter planes Mi-109s or FV-190s. They're heading west, I'll have to find out about their mission later. Here the train stops. It seems to me that we are somewhere near Noheim-Friedberg. A car is already waiting for me, and after passing through the forest, we arrive at a building that resembles an ancient castle. Here I am greeted by the Reichsmarshal's aide-de-camp. He tells me that Goering has not yet arrived and I will have to wait for him. He doesn't know why I've been summoned. I have no choice but to click my heels and stay here at the Luftwaffe's Western headquarters. I'm going for a 2-hour walk. What marvelous air there is in this hilly and forested area. I fill my lungs with it with pleasure. Why was I called here? I'm due back in 3 hours when the Reichsmarschall is expected to arrive. I hope he won't keep me waiting long and will receive me. But when I return, he's not here yet. Beside me has arrived a general, my old comrade still on training flights on Stukas in the area of Graz. He tells me about today's operation, for the planning and execution of which he is primarily responsible. There are constant reports of large-scale attacks on airfields in Belgium and northern France. The aircraft you saw this morning were taking part in a low-altitude attack on Allied air bases. We hope to be able to destroy so many aircraft there that enemy air superiority over the area of our halted Ardennes offensive will be neutralized. I tell the general that such a thing would have been impossible on the Eastern Front because the distance to be flown over enemy territory was too great, and flying at low altitude would mean huge losses from very strong air defenses. Could it have been different in the West? It seems unlikely. If the Americans succeed in such attacks over Germany, it is only because our aerodromes are insufficiently defended for the simple reason that we cannot spare enough men and military equipment for this purpose. He tells me that today all formations had maps with mapped routes of approach to enemy aerodromes. In the East, we have long since not developed practical actions based on theory, and do exactly the opposite. The commander of an air unit receives only the most general task, and how he will fulfill it is entirely his business, because he is fully responsible for it. Now the war in the air has become so diverse that no one can no longer rely on theories. Only commanders have the necessary experience, and at a critical moment they are more likely to make the right decision. It is very good that in the East we realized this in time, otherwise it is quite clear that none of us would have been able to fly any more. To the enemy 500 aeroplanes on the ground more or less is not so important as long as the crews remain alive. It would be far better to use these fighters, which have been piling up for raids for so long, over our own front and clear the airspace there. If we could eliminate for the time being the nightmare of huge Allied air superiority, we could give our comrades on the ground a good chance to feel the wind in their sails again. Any movement of troops and supplies behind the front lines could take place unimpeded. Any enemy aircraft that we might have destroyed would have been in most cases a genuine loss, because along with the aircraft their crews would have perished. All these thoughts cross my mind. A few hours later, the final results of the operation confirm my fears. 500 enemy aircraft were destroyed on the ground. Did not return 220 of our aircraft with their crews. Among the dead veterans, commanders of compounds, old men who are already few. All this saddens me. Today the operation will be reported to the Reichsmarschall and Supreme Commander-in-Chief as a great victory. What is this deliberate misrepresentation or inflated personal ambition? The adjutant comes in and says to me, "Oberst von Below just called. He'd like you to come in for a cup of coffee." But can't I report to the Reichsmarschall personally? The Reichsmarschall hasn't arrived yet. Why don't you visit von Below yet? I ponder for a while whether I need to change my clothes, but decide not to, in order to save my last shirt for the conversation with the Reichsmarschall. A comparatively long journey through the forest brings us to a town of barracks and rural dwellings, the Führer's headquarters in the west. Over coffee I tell von Belov about the latest developments on the Russian front. After 20 minutes he leaves me, but immediately returns and briefly asks me to follow him. Without suspecting anything, I pass through several rooms. Then he opens the door, lets me through, and I find myself face to face with the Führer. All I can think about is that I didn't put on a clean shirt. Nothing else comes to mind. I recognize the other people standing around him, the Reichsmarschall, who is beaming with pleasure, which happens very rarely, Admiral Donitz, Field Marshal Keitel, Chief of the General Staff Lieutenant General Jodl, and a number of other famous military men, including generals from the Eastern Front. They all surround a huge-sized table with a map showing the situation on the fronts. They are looking at me, and these looks make me nervous. The Führer notices my embarrassment and addresses me in complete silence. He gives me his hand and extols my latest operation. He says that in recognition of my bravery, he is awarding me the highest award for bravery, the Golden Oak Leaves with Swords and Diamonds to the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, and conferring on me the rank of Oberst. I listen to his words in amazement, but when he speaks with emphasis enough flying, "Your life must be preserved for the good of German youth, and your expertise," I am instantly alarmed. This means that I will have to stay on the ground. Farewell, my fighting comrades. My Führer, I cannot accept this award and promotion if I am no longer allowed to fly with my unit. My right hand is still in his hand. He is still gazing into my eyes. With his left hand he hands me the black, corduroy-clad case containing my new award. The many lamps in the room make the diamonds sparkle with all the colors of the rainbow. He looks at me with sadness. Then his expression changes and he says, "Okay, keep flying," and smiles. At that moment, a warm wave of joy covers my heart and I am happy. Later, von Belov tells me that he and the generals almost had a stroke when I put my terms. He assures me that the lightning that slipped across the face of the Führer not always turns into a smile. Everyone congratulates me. The commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe, with particular cordiality, he pinches my hand hard just out of pleasure. Admiral Donitz's congratulations are more moderate as he adds somewhat irritably, "I regard your request to continue flying," addressed to the Führer, "as not in keeping with the duty of a soldier. I have many good submarine captains, but sooner or later they all had to obey orders. Good thing he's not my commander-in-chief." The Führer leads me to a table with maps and tells me that the meeting has just discussed the situation in the Budapest area. I just came from there, right? He lists the reasons reported to him for the not entirely satisfactory progress of the operation, which has not yet resulted in a corridor for communication with the besieged city. I infer that weather, transport, and other difficulties were cited as explanations, but not once was there any mention of the mistakes we had witnessed ourselves while in the air, the separation of armoured divisions, and the choice of unsuitable terrain for attacking tanks and infantry. I report my opinion based on my long experience of the war on the Eastern Front, and on the fact that during this operation I flew in this sector for 8 hours every day, mostly at low altitude. Everyone listens to me in silence. After a short pause, the Führer makes a remark, circling the circle of his advisers with his eyes. "You see how I have been misled, and who knows for how long." He does not reproach anyone personally, although he knows the true circumstances, but it is obvious that he resents the deception. Pointing across the map, he expresses his desire to regroup our forces for a fresh attempt to lift the siege of Budapest. He asks me where, from my point of view, the terrain is most favorable to an attack by armored units. I give my opinion. Later this operation is completed successfully. The strike group approached the defensive lines of the defenders of Budapest, and those were able to break out of the city. When the meeting ends, the Führer leads me into his private office, furnished with great taste and utilitarian simplicity. I wish my comrades could have been here and lived with me all these hours, for I am here only because of their achievements. The Führer offers me a drink, and we talk about many things. He asks me about my wife, my son, my parents, and my sisters. After asking me in great detail about my personal affairs, he begins to talk about his ideas relating to rearmament. Quite naturally, he starts with the Luftwaffe, laying the main emphasis on the supposed modernization of the aircraft we use. He asks me whether I think it is justified to continue flying the slow U-87s now that the enemy fighters are flying at 400 kilometers per hour faster. Referring to some drawings and calculations, he points out that retractable landing gear can increase the speed of the U-87 by at most 50 kilometers per hour. On the other hand, its performance during dive would change in a most unfavorable way. He asks my opinion on every point. He discusses the smallest details of ballistics, physics, and chemistry with an ease that impresses me greatly. He also tells me of his desire to begin experiments to test the feasibility of mounting 4 30cm cannons in the wings instead of the present 2 37mm cannons. He believes that the aerodynamic qualities of our anti-tank aircraft would be greatly improved by this change. The same tungsten core projectiles would be used as ammunition, and as a result the efficiency of aircraft equipped with such weapons would surely increase. After explaining to me the far-reaching improvements in other fields such as artillery, small arms and submarines, all with the same startling familiarity, he tells me that he has personally written the preliminary text of the grounds for my latest award. We chat for about an hour and a half. When the resident reports that the film is ready to be shown, every new weekly news item is immediately shown to the Führer, who gives permission for it to be shown throughout Germany. It so happened we had only gone down one flight and were already sitting in the auditorium that the film began with a scene shot on the airfield, while our regiment was stationed at Steele-Wessenberg, followed by a scene of Stukas taking off and a panorama of tanks I had shot down west of Budapest. After the showing of the film, I left the Supreme Commander. Oberst von Belov handed me the certificates of award of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords and diamonds, which were kept in the Reich Chancellery. Each weighed over a kilogram, especially the last two, housed in massive gold frames which, their sentimental value aside, must have cost a hefty sum. I went to Göring's headquarters. The Reichsmarschall expressed his pleasure, which was the greater because recent events had made his position very difficult. The enemy's superiority in the air had increased all our troubles and hampered our plans. But how could it be done away with? He is immensely cheerful and proud that at this moment one of his men has inspired the Führer to create a new German award for bravery. Taking me a little aside, he says to me playfully, "Do you see how envious everyone is of me, and how happy they are at the deterioration of my position? At the meeting, the Führer said that he was creating a new and unique award for you, because your achievements were incomparable. While representatives of the other branches of the army objected that the recipient of the award was a Luftwaffe soldier whose shortcomings were the cause of so many problems. They wanted to know, was it impossible, at least theoretically, for soldiers of other branches of the armed forces to earn the award as well? You see now what I have to confront." He says he would never have believed that I could persuade the Führer to change his mind about banning my flights. Now that I have his permission, he cannot himself forbid me to fly. He is asking me, as he has done many times before, to accept the post of commander of the entire frontline aviation. But considering how I have obtained the Führer's consent to fly, I don't think he seriously believes he can convince me of the necessity of this, at least today. After lunch, I board a special train bound for Berlin, where my aeroplane is waiting to take me to my comrades at the front. I spend only a few hours in Berlin, but it is enough to attract a whole crowd of curious people, as the story of my award has already been reported by the press and on the radio. In the evening, I meet with Ritter von Holt, then chief of the organization Deutsche Sport. He tells me how, after many attempts, he was able to convince Hitler that I should lead the Reich's sports movement after the war. When my war memoirs are written and I hand over my present post to my successor, I will be offered this appointment. On my way to the front, I fly into Görlitz to meet my family, then take to the air again and set course for Budapest on the same day that reports of the situation on that section of the front become particularly grim. During my landing, the regiment is assembled so that the deputy squadron commander can congratulate me on behalf of the whole unit on my new award and rank. We then take to the air again and make a combat sortie to the Budapest area. If the Russian anti-aircraft gunners only knew how much gold and diamonds were flying over their heads, says one ground staff mechanic with a grin, you can bet they'd shoot a lot better and put more effort into it. A few days later, I receive a message from the Hungarian leader Selassie, who invites me to his headquarters south of Sopron. I am accompanied by General Fotterer, commander of the Hungarian Air Force, and Fridolin. In gratitude for our operations against Bolshevism in Hungary, he awards me the Hungarian highest military honor, the Medal of Bravery. So far, only 7 Hungarians have been awarded it. I am the 8th recipient and the only foreigner. I'm not too interested in the estate, the rights to which come with the award. I shall only have to take possession of it after the war, and no doubt it will become a resting place for all the pilots of my regiment. In the middle of January, we receive alarming reports that the Soviets have launched an offensive from the Baranow bridgehead and have penetrated deep into Silesia. Silesia is my home. I request the immediate transfer of the regiment to this section of the front. No definite orders are received until 15th January. Finally, I receive an order to move the entire regiment, except for the 1st Squadron, to the Udetfeld airfield in Upper Silesia. We are short of transport aircraft and carry the first shift of mechanics and gunners in our Ju-87s to be ready to fly as soon as we are relocated. On the way, we refuel at Olmütz. As we are flying over Vienna, the anti-tank commander says over the radio telephone, "I'll have to land. The engine's failing." I am very unhappy about this, not so much because of the near-true suspicion that the malfunction is due to the fact that his fiancée lives in Vienna, but because my operations officer, Lieutenant Weisbach, is flying with him. This means that Weisbach will be absent when we land at our new aerodrome, and I myself will have to sit on the damn phone. We are approaching our destination over the familiar, snow-covered slopes of the Sudetenland. Who would have ever thought that I would one day be flying combat sorties over this area? When we were over the vast expanse of Russia 1,700 kilometers from home, and when we had to retreat for the first time, we jokingly said, "If this continues, we will soon be based in Krakow." We had treated that city as a typical supply base with all the amenities associated with a city of that size, and with a certain appeal at least for a few days. Now our joke has become a reality even worse. Krakow has been captured by the Russians and is now far behind the front lines. We land at Udetfeld. I learn very little from the commander of the air division stationed here. The situation is difficult. Communications with most of our forward units have been cut. I am told that Russian tanks are already 40 kilometers east of Czestochowa, but nothing is certain yet. This is almost always the case when things get out of hand. The tank fire brigades in this sector, the 16th and 17th Armoured Divisions, are cut off at the moment, desperately fighting for their lives and unable to come to the aid of other divisions. As it appears that the Russians have launched a large-scale offensive, they have penetrated the defences of the 16th and 17th Armoured Divisions during the night, and accordingly our air attacks must be conducted with great caution. For the fact that some unit is deep in the Russian positions is no guarantee that it is the enemy. They may well turn out to be our units trying to fight their way back. I therefore order all pilots to make sure before attacking, flying at low altitude, that the troops they are attacking are in fact Soviet. On the flight back from Hungary we had fully loaded ammunition, but there is still no sign of our refueling vehicles. I glance at the fuel gauge. We only have fuel left for one short sortie. 20 minutes after landing at Udatfeld, we set off on our first combat sortie in the area. Czestochowa shows up in the distance. I survey the roads heading east, on which, according to reports, Russian tanks are moving. We're flying at low altitude over the city. But what's going on up there? There's a tank moving down the main street, followed by a second and a third. They look like T-34s, but they can't be. They're probably tanks from the 16th and 17th Armoured Divisions. I make another circle. There's no mistaking it. It's undoubtedly a T-34 with infantry seated on top of the armour. Ivans. These can't be the captured tanks we sometimes use from them, because in that case their crews would fire rocket launchers into the air or stretch swastika flags on their hulls. My last doubts dissipate when I see the infantry opening fire on us. I give the order to attack. We shouldn't drop bombs on the city. There's always the chance that there will be civilians down below who are taken by surprise and unable to evacuate the city. High-voltage transmission wires, tall houses with antennas, and other obstacles make it extremely difficult for anti-tank aircraft to attack from low altitude. Some of the T-34s are circling the city blocks, so it's easy to lose sight of them while diving. I shoot 3 tanks in the city centre. These tanks had to come from somewhere. We fly east along the railway and the motorway. Just a few kilometers outside the city, the next group of tanks rolls ahead of a column of trucks with infantry, ammunition and anti-aircraft guns. Here, on the open ground, we feel in our element and give the tanks an unpleasant surprise. Dusk falls and we return to base. 8 tanks are on fire. We are out of ammunition. We never took our task lightly, but we may have been inclined to treat tank hunting as a form of sport. Now, however, I feel that the whole thing has ceased to be a game. If I ever saw another tank after I ran out of ammunition, I would ram it with my aeroplane. I am seized with rage at the thought of this steppe horde rolling through the heart of Europe. Will anyone be able to rid Europe of them again? Today they have powerful allies supplying them with materials and have opened a second front. Will poetic justice one day bring terrible retribution? We fly from dawn to dusk regardless of casualties, disregarding the enemy and bad weather. We are on a crusade. We keep silent between missions and in the evenings. Everyone does his duty with clenched teeth, ready to give his life if necessary. Officers and soldiers realize that the life affirming flow unites them in a spirit of camaraderie, regardless of rank and class. And so it has always been with us. On one of these days, the Reich Marshal summons me urgently to Carinhal. I'm absolutely forbidden to fly. It's an order from the Führer. I'm going crazy with excitement to miss a whole day of flying and come to Berlin to find out about this situation. It's unbearable. I just won't do it. At this point, I feel that I am only responsible to myself. I call Berlin between flights with the intention of asking the Reichsmarshal to grant me a postponement until this crisis is over. Hoping for a concession from the Führer, I must be allowed to continue flying. I cannot just look on from the sidelines. The Reichsmarshal is not in attendance. I'm trying to contact the Chief of the General Staff. They're all in a meeting with the Führer and can't be reached. The matter is very urgent. I intend to pull all the levers before deliberately disobeying orders. As a last resort, I call the Führer. The telephonist at the Führer's headquarters does not understand me and probably concludes that I want to connect with this or that general. When I repeat that I want to speak to the Führer personally, he asks me, "Your rank?" "Corporal," I reply. Someone on the other end of the line laughs, realizing the joke, and connects me. Oberst von Beloff picks up the phone. "I know what you want, but I beg you not to anger the Führer. Didn't the Reichsmarshal say anything to you?" I reply that that's why I'm calling and describe the gravity of the current situation. But it doesn't work. He advises me to personally come to Berlin and talk to the Reichsmarshal. He believes that there is a new assignment for me. I'm so furious that I can't speak and hang up the phone. There is a sepulchral silence in the room. Everyone knows that when I'm furious, it's best to give me time to cool down in silence. Tomorrow we have to fly to Klein Aisch. I know the area well. Our tank acquaintance Count Struckwitz lives nearby. The best way to forget my frustrations is to fly to Berlin and see the Reichsmarshal. He receives me at the Currenhal. I am struck by his irritability and lack of good-heartedness. We have a conversation during a short walk through the woods. He immediately opens fire with guns of the largest caliber. "I spoke to the Führer about you last week, and this is what he said when Rudel was here. I didn't have the heart to tell him that he should stop flying. I just couldn't tell him that. But then what are you, the Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, to do? You can tell him that—" "I can't. I am glad to see Rudel, but I do not want to meet him again until he gives in to my wishes. I'm quoting the Führer's words, and I'm telling you so directly. I also do not wish to discuss the matter any further. I know in advance all your arguments and objections. This is a stunning blow." I return to Klein Aisch. During the flight, my mind is preoccupied with the events of the last few hours. I know now that I must ignore the order. I feel that it is my due to Germany, to my country, to throw all my experience and my personal efforts on the scale. Otherwise, I will appear to myself as a traitor. I must continue to fly no matter what the consequences. In my absence, the regiment makes a combat sortie. Lieutenant Weisbach, who did not take part in the flights because I needed an operational officer, goes on a tank hunt with Lieutenant Ludwig, a first-class marksman and holder of the Knight's Cross. They do not return from the battle. For us, it is an irreparable loss of two invaluable battle comrades. These days we have to give everything we have. We can't spare ourselves. These operations keep me more stressed than ever, because I remember all the time that I did not fulfill the orders of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief. If anything should happen to me, I should be denied military honors and be disgraced. The thought worries me. But I can't do anything about it. I am in the air from morning till late in the evening. All my officers know that if anyone asks me, I'm not on a combat sortie but just stepped off somewhere. Individual accounts of tanks destroyed must always be listed in the daily reports sent to Luftwaffe headquarters each evening with the name of the pilot. Since the no-flying order remains in style, the figure of tanks destroyed by me is no longer recorded on my personal account, but goes to the account of the whole regiment. Until now, the figures of tanks destroyed were only recorded in this category if two pilots attacked the same target. Then, in order to avoid double counting, the figure was recorded under the heading "The name of the pilot cannot be specified precisely. The victory is attributed to the entire unit." Later, we often had disputes with the command, which pointed out that, before we could always specify the name of the pilot, why suddenly so many tanks appeared in the column joint account. At first, we avoided the questions by saying that nowadays, when any one person spots a tank, we all dive on it at the same time, as everyone wants to strike. One day during my sortie, a spy in the person of a Luftwaffe officer shows up to investigate and pulls everything out of my operations officer, promising that he won't tell anyone anything. In addition, one general catches me by surprise immediately after the flight at the airfield at Grotkow, to which we have just relocated. He doesn't believe my assurances that it was only a short test flight, but that, he says, doesn't matter because he didn't see anything. Nevertheless, I soon discover that the truth has reached the high command. One day, shortly after the general's visit, I am mentioned in a military communique as having destroyed 11 tanks, and at the same time I am summoned by telephone to Corinhal. I fly there and meet a very cold reception. The first words of the Reichsmarschall: "The Führer knows that you continue to fly." I believe he learnt about it from yesterday's communique. He has asked me to warn you to stop flying immediately and permanently. You must not force him to resort to disciplinary action for disobeying an order. Moreover, he has no idea that this is the behavior of a man who has been awarded Germany's highest award for bravery. I suppose I may not add my own comments. I listen to him in silence. After briefly questioning me about the situation in Silesia, he lets me go and I return to the unit the same day. It is clear to me that I must keep flying if I am to maintain my composure during such a difficult time for my country. I must keep flying. We are hunting for tanks in the industrial area of Upper Silesia, where it is easier for the enemy to camouflage and harder for us to spot. Our attacking U-87s swirl between the chimneys of the industrial towns of Upper Silesia. In Kiefernstadt we meet our artillery, which we have not seen before, and help them to eliminate the numerically superior forces of the Soviets and their T-34s. Gradually a new front is created on the Oder. To create a new front out of literally nothing. Only Field Marshal Schorner could do that. We often see him now, when he visits our base to discuss with me the current situation and possible operations. Of particular value to him are the results of our intelligence. At this time it is reported that squadron leader Lau is missing with his gunner. He was hit by anti-aircraft guns, made an emergency landing near Gross-Wartenberg, and captured by the Russians. After he failed in his attempt to land away from the Soviet troops, he had to land right in their midst. A front is gradually being established along the Oder River. I receive orders by telephone to immediately relocate the regiment to the airfield Markisch Friedland in Pomerania, and the 2nd Squadron to Frankfurt. The situation here has become more dangerous than in Silesia. Dense snow is falling, which prevents us from flying in close formation. So we take off in threes and head for Markisch Friedland via Frankfurt. Some of our aeroplanes land at intermediate aerodromes at Sagan and Sorau. The weather is disgusting. At Frankfurt, they are already waiting for me to land. I must call the old base at Grotkow without delay. When I am connected, I learn that shortly after my departure, Field Marshal Schorner came to see me and made a big fuss. Knocking his fist on the table, he asked who had given me the order to relocate. Lieutenant Niemann, my operations officer, told him that the order came from Luftwaffe headquarters. Luftwaffe headquarters. It's all a screen. I want to know who ordered Rudel to fly away. Call him to Frankfurt and order him to wait there. I'll put the matter to the Führer himself. I insist that he stays here. Am I to hold the front with one infantry with rifles? I find out about all this by telephone. If I want to get to Markisch Friedland before dark, I can't waste any more time. I call the Führer's headquarters to ask whether I should continue my flight or return to Silesia. In the first case, Field Marshal Schorner is to release my men held by him at Grotkow, so that I will have a full complement of men and equipment when I arrive at the new location. I am told that the decision has been made my regiment is definitely transferred to the north, as the situation in this sector, of which Reichsführer SS Himmler has been appointed commander, is much more serious. I am landing at Markisch Friedland with the first few aircraft in a heavy snowstorm and in total darkness. The rest of the regiment should arrive tomorrow. The second squadron will remain in Frankfurt and will make combat sorties from there. After we find accommodation for the night, I call Himmler in Ordensburg-Crossensee to report my arrival in the sector. He is glad that I am here and very pleased that I won the duel with Field Marshal Schorner. He asks me what I am going to do now. The time is 11 p.m., so I reply, I'm going to bed since I need to get up as early as possible tomorrow to get a general idea of the situation. But Himmler thinks otherwise. And I can't sleep, he says. I tell him that he doesn't need to fly tomorrow morning, and that when people fly non-stop, sleep is indispensable. After much idle chatter, he informs me that he is sending a car for me to see me as soon as possible. Since I'm low on fuel and ammunition in any case, the information about the new sector that his commander can give me may at least alleviate me of a number of organizational problems. On the way to Wardenburg, we get stuck in snowdrifts. By the time I get there, it's 2 in the morning. The first person I see is his chief of staff, with whom we have a long discussion about the situation and general matters. I am particularly curious to hear from him how Hitler is embarking on his new task, seeing that he lacks the necessary training and experience. His chief of staff is an army officer, not a member of the SS. He tells me that it is a great pleasure to work with Himmler because he is not at all a self-righteous man and is not looking for an opportunity to show his power. He does not think that he knows better than the experts of his staff, readily agrees with their suggestions, and then uses all his authority to implement the solution worked out. And that's why everything goes smoothly. Only one thing will strike you. You will always have the feeling that Himmler never says what he really thinks. A few minutes later, I discuss the situation and my task with Himmler. I immediately notice his concern. The Soviets have almost bypassed Schneidemal and are tearing into eastern Pomerania, towards the Oder, partly along the Neisse Valley, and also north and south of it. There are very few units in this neighborhood that could be called combat-ready. A battle group is being formed in the neighborhood of Markisch Friedland to hold back the enemy forces that have broken through and to prevent their imminent movement towards the Oder. No one can yet predict to what extent our troops in the neighborhood of Posen-Grodens will be able to fight their way back. In any case, they will not be able to recover quickly. Intelligence leaves much to be desired, and it is therefore impossible to get a complete picture of their position. This, therefore, will be one of our first tasks, besides attacking the enemy at all known points he has already reached, especially his mechanized and armored forces. I am ascertaining the needs for bombs, fuel, and ammunition. If they are not met, in a few days I will not be able to fulfill combat missions. Himmler promises me, in his own interest, that my requests will be met first. I explain to him what possibilities I see for the utilization of my compound, basing my viewpoint on the picture he has painted for me. I leave Ordensburg at 4:30 a.m., knowing that in 2 hours I will be flying over the sector. The Stukas fly all day without interruption. Our aeroplanes are decorated with the emblem of the German knightly order, because now, as 6 centuries ago, we are involved in a battle with the East. Very cold weather is setting in. The snow cover on the aerodrome reaches a height of 5 centimeters when we take off. This snow dust gets packed into the gun mechanisms on our anti-tank planes and freezes as soon as we are in the air. After 1 or 2 shells are fired, the guns jam. I can't stand it. Here below me, Russian armoured columns are advancing on Germany, and when we go into attack, at times overcoming very strong air defences, what happens? The guns are silent. Some pilots are already thinking of crashing into the tanks out of sheer desperation. We go in again and again, but it's hopeless. It happens to us at Charnikau, at frontlines, in many other places. The T-34s are tearing westwards. Sometimes it only takes 1 shot to blow up a tank, but often it is not enough. The most precious days are lost before I finally get enough men to continually clear the runway of snow. The sheer number of tanks makes the hair on my head move. We fly to all sides of the world. If the daylight hours were 3 times as long, it was still too little. Interaction with our fighter squadron is beyond praise. They respond to every reconnaissance report we make enemy forward units at so-and-so or so-and-so point. In the joint operation east of Deutsche Krone and in the woods south of Schlop, we were able to inflict substantial losses on the Soviets. When tanks find themselves in a village, they usually drive straight into the houses and try to take cover there. After that, they can only be spotted by a long pole sticking out of the middle of the house, which is nothing but a tank cannon. A breach forms in the wall of the house, and since it is unlikely that there are still Germans living in it, we come in from behind and shoot the engine. No other methods of attack work. The tanks catch fire and explode along with the ruins of the houses. If any of the crew survives, they sometimes try to drive the burning tank into a new shelter, but in this case the outcome of the fight is already decided, because at that moment you can strike at any vulnerable part of the tank. I never drop bombs on villages, even if it is justified from a military point of view, because I shudder at the very thought of hitting the German inhabitants, who are already defenseless against the terror of the Russians. It is a terrible thing to fly and fight over our own homes, especially when you see masses of men and military equipment rushing into your country like a flood. We are now playing the role of a dam, a small obstacle, but unable to stem the tide. Germany, the whole of Europe, is now at stake in this devil's game. Priceless forces are bleeding. The last bastion of peace is crumbling under the onslaught of Red Asia. We are more exhausted by this thought in the evening than by the incessant flying during the day. The refusal to accept this doom and the certainty that it can't happen keeps us going. I would hate to blame myself for not doing my best and preventing the frightening, threatening spectre of defeat. I know that every decent young German thinks as I do. South of our sector, the situation looks very grim. Frankfurt on Oder is under threat, so at night we receive orders to move into the Fürstenwalde area, which is closer to the critical sector. A few hours later, we fly into the Frankfurt-Kustrin operational area. The wedges of the Soviet offensive have reached the Oder on the outskirts of Frankfurt. Further north, Kustrin is surrounded and the enemy, wasting no time, seizes a bridgehead at Goeritz-Reitwein on the west bank of the frozen river. One day, like the Prussian cavalry General Zieten 300 years ago, we take part in a battle east of Frankfurt, the scene of a historic battle. Here a small German force is surrounded by Soviet tanks. We attack them, and those tanks that didn't catch fire are trying to get away across open ground. We go in to attack them again and again. Our comrades on the ground jump for joy, throw their rifles and helmets into the air, and without caring for cover pursue the retreating Russians. Our fire puts every last tank out of action. A joyous mood reigns among all who witnessed our success. After all the tanks have been destroyed or captured, I prepare a container and write a congratulatory message to our comrades on behalf of the regiment and on my own behalf. I circle at a very low altitude and drop the container with the note and a bar of chocolate right at their feet. The sight of their happy, grateful faces strengthens us in anticipation of difficult operations and inspires us to renew our persistent efforts to ease the struggles of our comrades in arms. Unfortunately, the first days of February are very cold. The Oder has frozen over in many places so badly that the Russians can wade across the river. They often put planks on the ice and I see lorries driving over them. The ice does not seem to me to be strong enough to support the weight of the tanks. Since the front on the Oder is not yet established, and there are many gaps in its line with no German soldiers to resist the advance, the Soviets managed to capture a few bridgeheads, such as at Reitwein. Our tank troops, which were brought into the battle too late, face here a strong enemy defense on the west bank, backed up by heavy artillery. The river crossings have been protected by heavy anti-aircraft fire since day one. Ivan is well informed of our presence in this sector. Every day I am ordered to destroy the crossings in order to delay the offensive and buy time for our reinforcements and combat equipment to approach. I inform you that it is almost useless at the moment, because you can cross the Oder almost anywhere. The bombs break through the ice, leaving relatively small holes, and that's all we can achieve. I attack only recognizable targets on both sides of the river or vehicles crossing it, but not so-called bridges, which strictly speaking do not exist at all. What looks like a bridge on an aerial photograph usually turns out to be infantry tracks and vehicle ruts and planks laid on ice. If we bombard these tracks, the Ivan just crosses over the ice away from them. This becomes clear to me on the first day, because I have flown over them countless times, and besides, these crossings are nothing new to me. I know them from the Don, Donets, Dniester, and other Russian rivers. Therefore, disregarding orders, I concentrate my attacks on the genuine targets on both sides of the river tanks, vehicles and artillery. One day a general sent from Berlin appears and tells me that new bridges always appear in photographs taken from reconnaissance aeroplanes. But he says, "You have not reported that these bridges are not destroyed. You have to keep attacking them." By and large, I explain to him, they're not bridges at all, and as I see his face turn into a question mark, an idea occurs to me. I tell him that I was just about to take to the air and invite him to fly with me, and I promise him that I will provide practical proof of this. He hesitates for a moment, then, seeing the curious looks of my young officers, who have heard my proposal with some glee, he agrees. I give the unit orders to attack the bridgehead, and myself approach the target at extremely low altitude, and fly from Schwedt to Frankfurt am Oder. In some places we encounter respectable anti-aircraft fire, and the general soon recognizes that these bridges are in fact tracks. He has seen enough. After landing, he is very pleased that he was able to see for himself and makes a report accordingly. We are relieved of our daily duty to attack these bridges. One evening, Reichsminister Speer brings me a new assignment from the Führer. I am to draw up a plan for its fulfillment. He tells me briefly. The Führer is planning attacks on the hydroelectric dams supplying power to the war industry in the Urals. He expects that the production of enemy armaments, and especially tanks, will be halted for a year. This year will give us a chance to take advantage of the respite. You are to organize this operation, but on no account should you fly yourself. The Führer has repeated this several times. I drew the minister's attention to the fact that there were more suitable candidates for the task, namely, from the Long-Range Air Command, who are familiar with such things as astronomical navigation, etc., much better than I, who had been trained in dive bombing and therefore had a completely different knowledge and experience. Moreover, if I am to task the crews and remain afterwards in a normal condition, I must get permission to fly myself. The Führer wants you to be the one in charge of this Operation Spear Objects. I ask a few crucial technical questions relating to the type of aircraft and bombs with which this operation is to be carried out. If it is to be done as quickly as possible, only the Heinkel 177 can be seriously considered, although it is not entirely clear whether it will be suitable for this purpose. From my point of view, the only bomb for such a purpose is something like a torpedo, but it has yet to be tested in action. I refuse his suggestion to use ton bombs. I am sure they cannot be successful. I show the minister photographs taken in the northern sector of the Eastern Front when I dropped 2-ton bombs on the concrete supports of a bridge over the Neva, and it did not collapse. This problem, therefore, must be solved, as must the question of my participation in this mission. These are my conditions if the Führer insists that I take on this task. He already knows my objections concerning the fact that my experience belongs to a completely different field. I receive a dossier with photographs of the factories and study them with interest. I see that a large part of them is underground, and they are practically invulnerable from the air. The photographs, which were taken during the war, show the dam itself, the hydroelectric power station, and some factory buildings. How were these photographs taken? I think back to my time in the Crimea and put 2 and 2 together. When we were stationed at Sarabuz and kept ourselves in shape by weightlifting and throwing discs after sorties, a plane painted black would often land at the airfield, and very mysterious passengers would descend from it. One day a crew member told me in confidence what was going on. This plane brought Russian priests from the freedom-loving states of the Caucasus, who had volunteered to carry out important missions for the German command. Dressed in cassocks, and with their beards fluttering through the air, they each carried a small bag on their chests with either a camera or explosives, depending on their assignment. These priests saw the German victory as the only chance to regain their independence and, with it, freedom for their religion. They were fanatical enemies of the Bolshevik world and therefore our allies. They still stand before my eyes, men with white beards and noble facial features, as if carved from wood. From the depths of Russia they delivered photographs, travelled for months and returned after completing their assignment. If one of them disappeared, he most likely gave his life for freedom or as a result of a failed parachute jump, caught while on assignment or on his way back behind the front lines. I was impressed by my interlocutor's account of how these holy men jumped into the night without hesitation, strengthened by faith in their great mission. At that time we were fighting in the Caucasus, and they were dropped by parachute over mountain valleys where their relatives lived, with the help of whom they intended to organize resistance and commit acts of sabotage. All this came to my mind as I pondered where the photographs of these factories had come from. After a few general remarks on the general course of the war, in which Speer expressed his complete confidence in the Führer, he left early in the morning, promising to send me new details concerning the Ural plans. But it never came to that, because the events of 9th February made my participation in this operation impossible. Thus the task of working out the plan was entrusted to someone else. But then, in the fever of events at the end of the war, this plan lost its practical significance.